What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be taking a big look at the Bitcoin price chart and the altcoin market. As we all know, we have been dealing with negative price action over the last couple of weeks. Really, it was more of just kind of like 2 weeks ago, a big event of where the prices all moved down together, and we've actually been stuck down here for 11 days. The prices have just been flat for 11 days, which has a lot of people scratching their head. I have spent more time in these charts than I have, I think, in the history of my YouTube channel. Throughout the entire weekend, putting in full days, obviously putting out way more videos and spending way more time. And I have a lot I want to share with you to present the idea that we've actually already capitulated in this market. Now, if you caught my video that I released over the weekend, I did a podcast-style chat with TXMC from Alpha Beta Soup, and we talked about the Fed. I've had a lot of requests and questions about the Fed. It's something in particular I don't focus on too much, but I've had so many questions about it. Wanted to share that with you guys. But we're going to circle back to that here in a moment. Back in December, I released the video, The Bear Strikes the Bitcoin Price Chart. Bear strikes, what to look for. And in this video, we talked about how bear markets are incredibly difficult to navigate. And I presented the 3 ways I could imagine price action playing out. As you guys know, you've been following this channel, I've been looking for an ABC correction to come out of here in this Bitcoin bear market for the longest time. Those are the ones I thought were the most likely to happen. But I had also presented the idea of what it would look like if the altcoin market actually took a whirlwind of a hurt and there was the potential for Bitcoin to be more bullish and that this actually wasn't the end of Bitcoin. I replayed this in a video a week or 2 ago, but as we can see, this is the scenario that has played out over here on the Bitcoin price chart. From my speculating, I'd created 3 different scenarios on how I could imagine it playing out. 2 of them being optimistic for the altcoin market in the short term, 1 of them being painful for the altcoin market. Scenario 1, a quick retrace back to the 702 Fibonacci retracement, which I didn't think was very likely, but that the more likely one that I was leaning on was that we would actually dip down lower and go back into the 702 Fibonacci retracement from there. Obviously, we paused there for 4 months, and that's what we've been looking at on this YouTube channel, is for a retracement to come in here. And the one I deemed that I thought that was the least likely, because my bearishness for Bitcoin has been so strong, would be what would happen if it actually played out more so like this. So I'll play this for us. Scenario 3, the one that isn't going to be too bright for the altcoins in the short term, is that Bitcoin continues heading down to these lower price levels, and then Bitcoin just stays down here and does not go into a retracement, and then Bitcoin suddenly starts to break down. Now, you're going to hear something surprising come out of my mouth, actually, if something like that does end up happening, is that I'm actually going to suddenly become bullish on Bitcoin again. That I don't think will actually head down to $13,500 at this point, but that Bitcoin would actually recover from here and go up and get pretty close to $100,000, maybe up into the mid-90s. And it's during that time period where the altcoin market goes crazy and Bitcoin gets that parabolic blow off top that everybody's been looking for that has not arrived. And as we all know by now, that is what has been happening in here. I really thought it was unlikely that that's the one that would end up playing out in here, but hard to deny that's what's been happening. So the big question comes in here of, well, why would it do that, right? Why would prices start moving to the upside again? Has anything in this market happened that would corroborate that a bear market for Bitcoin would be over, or a bear market for the altcoin market would be over at this point? As many of you know, there was an interesting phenomenon going on with Bitcoin from October all the way through March and April, in which the Bitcoin price chart was following the exact same bear market fractal that it was following back in 2018. It had gotten pretty annoying following this because it almost became irrelevant to do anything outside of saying, we're just following this bear market fractal that we have followed before. Never in any charts that I've stared at have I seen a fractal follow something so closely before than we have with Bitcoin during this time period. And what was so interesting about this fractal in here is that it was taken from this moment in time right in here in Bitcoin's bear market, the moment right before it actually ended up capitulating down here. However, some things started to deviate a little bit in here to where it wasn't really following it precisely any longer. There was one interesting thing that did end up happening, which we were watching at that time, was that when we look at what happened back in here, back in 2018, at that moment, Bitcoin was actually reaching back up to its 200-day moving average after doing this whole fractal. It went back to its 200-day moving average, boom, 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 gone. And that while our price action didn't reach out like that, we said, hey, look, we're at that 200-day moving average, and it's looking very similar in here. But once again, while it didn't reach as high as Bitcoin did back in 2018, structurally, the reach out looks similar. And where did it go? It went back to the 200-day moving average. So, okay, that's odd. But the reality of this is that this fractal is taken from way deep down in a bear market. We're coming off of an all-time high on Bitcoin. Why are we making a fractal that comes from deep down into a bear market before a capitulation happens? Total head scratcher. Why is something that happens so deep, not something that's like a topping structure, but deep into a bear market, why is that happening from the all-time high? So then I say to myself, okay, well, what about back here, back in 2014? What did this moment in time look like for Bitcoin back in 2014, which would have been this moment right in here? Would have been the moment right before it capitulated. And what does that look like right now? And eerily, if we squeeze this thing down to size, we could see that even this whole move in here was incredibly similar to that moment in time before Bitcoin capitulated back in 2014. Rising to the top, the big fall, the consolidation, another fall, final, and then what does it do? Bounces around in here and then goes on for capitulation. But the question becomes, why is Bitcoin doing that from this height? You know, we could take fractals all we want. We could say, hey, look, it looks like this. This must be what it's doing because it looks like this. But the reality is it's doing something eerily similar from both moments in time, from the last two bear markets as it head into the capitulation phase. So why are we doing this from the actual all-time high? Why have we followed this thing so incredibly perfectly from the depths of a bear market? Not the top of a bear market, but the depths of a bear market before capitulation. Why have we been following these things so precisely? And it's because everything indicates the top of the bull run was actually right over here, even though we set a new all-time high. Now, I've heard a lot of people say this, and whenever they say it, I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever, man. And what we know is that the larger wallets, the kind of whales of Bitcoin, all got out in here, and they never returned during this moment. They all sold into that top, and they never recovered. In all time frames, they were getting out, or all wallet sizes, they were getting out in that moment, and then they never came back in for that. This was it. All the large wallets getting out in here. Even our guys down here with at least one Bitcoin in their wallet, they were all getting out during that time period too. The weekly RSIs on Bitcoin were just massively down, massive divergences happening over here on the RSI between these two time periods. And what we know is that most of the altcoins all kind of topped in this time period right in here. Whether they just went into retracements of their 2017, 2018 bull runs or whatnot, most of them topped back in that time period. Also, at that time, anybody who's been in this market for several years, and I guess people who even came into the market there at that time, you can kind of compare what has sentiment been like since that moment. Even when we set that new all-time high, what was sentiment like at that time compared to this moment? This was utter euphoria. This was utter wildness and craziness in the market where laser eyes and diamond hands were introduced, where you had Jim Cramer coming in, you had Kevin O'Leary coming in, you had just absolute retail madness in this time period right in here, and over here, not so much. So for peak excitement, peak activity, peak market strength, it was all in this moment right in here. Everybody was looking for a blow-off top to come in here, but somehow, some way, they were able to unload all of those Bitcoins and maintain a pretty stable price while doing it onto the retail investors. And not only was it peak excitement, peak euphoria, peak media coverage, and all that, Coinbase literally IPO'd at the actual top. They pinpoint nailed when to IPO. And then as the price went back into its 702 Fibonacci retracement, a kind of return to normal phase in here, what happened? Elon Musk going on national television, going on to Saturday Night Live, to the moon, return to normal. We're going to go to the moon still. The excitement's not done. Elon Musk is on national television, and boom, that was it. Instead of having some just kind of monster V bottom recovery coming out of here, we waddle down here for months on end and then just kind of work our way up in here using these bear market fractals that we've seen happen in here that show up way after the major first crash has already ended up occurring. We end up seeing these bear market fractals happening here on the price chart. And well, if we look back to the past and we say, okay, if this was the peak excitement moment in here, and then that this moment that's been happening in here, these deep bear market fractals that we've been following in here, has enough time elapsed in this whole thing and this structure for this to actually be a completed bear market for Bitcoin, like a running flat completed bear market for Bitcoin. And if we look back to the past to see how much time would have elapsed between that time period of saying April 14th, the day Coinbase IPO'd, the day of peak excitement in here, and how much time has elapsed in here, we could see we've elapsed enough time to be into a capitulative phase in here. Even dating back to 2018, we've elapsed enough time in here to say, hey, you know what? We've nearly completed a bear market. This has gone on even longer than it did back in 2018. Take this one off of here. We'll scoot ourselves up to see, hey, enough time has elapsed from where we would have started this whole thing to now getting to here. In addition, when we look over at the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, it topped back here. It topped back in March, February, that time period, without setting a new high there in November. That's interesting in itself. Now, this thing, the way the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust works is very different from Bitcoin's spot price. But even over here in the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, we saw that the top of it came during the euphoria, during the laser eyes and diamond hands time period, and not back here in November and December. And that even from a length of time period, you could see, hey, it's elapsed enough time to have done a completed bear market in there. In addition, one of the wilder things as well has been that the corrective structure that happened from June of 2019 till the C19 sell-off in March, it's been of equal length of the one that we've had right now. Same sized correction for the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust at the exact same time, holding on top of the highs from back in June. And if we look at things like Litecoin and we say, all right, how long did this bear market take to play out for Litecoin back in here? And we line it up to the precise day of where Litecoin topped in here, put it just like that, we could see that the bear market play out here for Litecoin has elapsed the exact same amount of time as it did back in 2018, where the bottom came in. Exact amount of time that it took in the last bear market for Litecoin. So we know that most altcoins, whether they set new all-time highs or didn't, most did not. They peaked back here during the euphoria phase of the market. And for some reason, Bitcoin started playing out deep bear market fractals in here. We know that enough time has elapsed since that euphoria phase, like we saw in 2018, that this is the amount of time it took for capitulation and for the ending of like we saw in Litecoin. And that even these structures we have over here on Bitcoin are that of that same phase right at the very end of its bear market from both 2014 and from 2018. And that oddly enough, it is played out similarly to what can happen before a new high can get set, which may solve the mystery of why this thing has followed this deep bear market fractal for so long, which, even from 2014's exact same phase, oddly similar as well, right into the capitulation moment. In addition, we've been watching the US dollar currency index, or the DXY, comparing that to the Euro USD, which we have seen that on that May 12th, on that capitulation day, so far has been a reversal over here on the DXY, with the Euro bouncing right off of the level that it needed to bounce off of on the exact same day. In addition, when we consider market sentiment in the way it is right now, most of the market has capitulated to say that we are now in a bear market, in which we have been in extreme fear. In one of the most extreme fear time periods that we've had dating back to C19. Even in last summer, we were bouncing up and down in extreme fear, but not this level of complete extreme fear like we had back at C19. If you haven't felt the pain of the market, my hats are off to you. Even I have absolutely felt the pain of this market. But like we showed over the last couple of weeks, is that the corrections that we're seeing over here in the broader aspect of the market, right? So there's some that are not in all-time highs, there's some that are, but like when you look at things like Ethereum and how this happened, how it got into its new all-time high, rose up, whack, goes on to set a new high, consolidation, and capitulation right back down to these lows, which is the same thing we've seen in Total 2, the altcoin market cap, and the same thing we've seen happen over here on Total 3, the altcoin market cap excluding Ethereum. And this is calculated by TradingView, that with the parabolic rise, a hard slap down, a new high, and then capitulation back to the lows, that even for Bitcoin back in 2017, that's the same style correction it had as its first major correction above the all-time high. The parabolic rise, the big whack, the setting the new high, waddling, and capitulation right back down to the lows. And that, when we go over to CoinTrader Pro and we look at the altcoin market as a whole and we exclude Ethereum from it, this is all being taken from CoinMarketCap. So it's pulling all the market cap data from CoinMarketCap. Look where the market cap is. It is resting on top of the 2017 all-time high. We have extreme fear on top of this moment, and we have capitulation happening in this moment where people are selling out on top of the all-time high, in which we have the same thing that we just showed for Bitcoin. Rise up parabolically, whack, new high, capitulation. The precise same thing. Parabolic, whack, new high, capitulation. All the while showing what the capitulation can look like back in 2014, straight into the ending phase. And also, eerily enough, following along with one of the things that we talked about back in December. And at the same time, so far, reversal on DXY and reversal on Euro USD. And in regards to the altcoin market cap, do I dare say it? Double tap on top of the all-time high. But if this is true, this odd structure happening over here on Bitcoin sets a new high, sets a new low, enough time has elapsed for a completed bear market. For some reason, from the all-time highs, it's been doing these bear market fractals and it just capitulated right back down to its lows. Are there any examples in Bitcoin of something like this happening before, where it breaks out, goes on this huge run, and then has some correction like this, and then still somehow goes on and sets a new all-time high? And an example of that in Bitcoin would have been back in 2017, in which it did have that, where it had a big run, a big breakout, and it would have been this whole phase right back in here. And we'll zoom in on this really close so you can see exactly how that all played out in here. And that there was this first here, and then a rise up with a whack, followed by a new all-time high, waddles here at the lows, and then capitulates, and then goes on to new highs. And that's exactly what you have in here for Bitcoin right now. Boom. The exact same thing. I'll try to adjust these to get them evenly spread here, so you can see these, how these played out together before it went on to set a new high. But what ended up happening to Bitcoin after that, after it goes on and just barely sets a new all-time high, then it does really crash, right? It comes all the way down here, which for Bitcoin would be like going back down again to that $13,000 price point. But that to have a corrective structure that happens just like this up in here, or if you notice kind of these lows hold in here, you have nothing but a straight fall down, waddling, and then capitulation. That's what you've had in here so far. And capitulation. Again, it's one thing to just take these fractals and say, hey, look, this fractal looks similar, right? That's not really what I like to do, but it's when you have a buildup of a bunch of different things all happening at the same time. That's where those things can all be integrated together to like build a case, right? And that's kind of what I'm doing here, just trying to build this case on how all these things correlate with each other and trying to tie that back into why the heck would that have ever been anything that I would have thought of from the very beginning. And then in the end, this is the one that ends up doing, right? The most pain trade is the one that it ends up doing. But then at the same time, we have, a big event happen, right? There was a black swan, a catalyst event that terrified the market at the exact same time. And negative price action does so much already. But when you add something like that, what happened with Terra and what happened with Terra Luna and what happened with Terra USD, never seen anything like that before in this market ever before. That stuff was scary, man. But it also just so happened to occur into this moment, into this moment, and into this moment right in here. All of it happening at the same time, while the DXY takes a hard knockback along with the euro bouncing exactly where it is. These are those things where I always say, is there a puppet master pulling the puppet strings behind the doors? Is it God? Is it a simulation? What is it? That all these things can happen even when the narratives are of the absolute worst or of the absolute best, like we saw back at the top, where nobody trusted the Fed back here. Nobody thought that the money printer would ever turn off right in here. And let's tie that back in right now, right? What's happening with the narrative with the Fed? I had this discussion with TXMC because I've been getting requests to bring it up. With the DXY being so high, bond yields being so high, everybody's been screaming, the Fed, the Fed, the Fed. And the Fed has been making a strong voice that their goal is to stop inflation in its tracks. And if they have to do that by raising rates and doing quantitative tightening, they will. But it's very rare that I ever even focus on narratives in the first place. But everybody's screaming that this is going to be a big, huge problem for all markets and all risk on assets. But I presented a lot of, cases there in that conversation with TXMC that, how can I ever read it? How can I read the Fed? There's so many times where they've been inconsistent or they were just dead wrong or they weren't telling the truth and then they end up doing something opposite. And we know that the euphoria phase in this market where everybody believed that prices were going to keep going up was back in April of 2021. So I went and found the transcript from Chairman Jerome Powell's press conference on April 28th, 2021. So here we are on page 2 of his press conference. He says, so for asset purchases, we've said that we would continue at the current pace of asset purchases until we see substantial further progress towards our goals. For interest rates, as I said moments ago, we want to see the labor market conditions consistent with maximum employment. We want to see inflation at 2%, and we want to see it on track to exceed 2%. On page 4, Paul Kiernan asks, hi, Chairman Powell. Thanks for doing this. I guess since I'm first, I'll go ahead and re-up Howard's question from the last press conference. Is it time to start talking about tapering yet? Have you and your colleagues had any conversations to this effect? Thanks. Chairman Powell responds, thank you. So, no, it is not time yet. We've said that we would let the public know when it is time to have that conversation, and we said we'd do that well in advance of any actual decision to taper or asset purchases, and we will do so. In the meantime, we'll be monitoring progress toward our goals. We first articulated this substantial further progress test at our December meeting. Economic activity and hiring have just recently picked up after slowing over the winter, and it will take some time before we see substantial further progress. And in here, he still talks about inflation being transitory. I would note that a transitory rise in inflation above 2% this year would not meet the standard. All the while, this was the top of the market for the altcoins and for Bitcoin. And so if we sit here and we try to read the Fed right now, or at least for me personally, right? If I try to read the Fed and say, hey, the Fed's being negative down here, well, what were they like at the top? At the top, they said they still were not thinking about raising interest rates, that inflation was transitory, and that they were not even considering quantitative tightening yet. But that was the top. Any attempt to have read what the Fed was saying in that meeting would have led to the thought that prices will keep going up because the printers are going to keep running, interest rates are not going to rise, and they're not going to run off the balance sheet. That was the message that we were getting at the Pico top. So while it's fun to go through this exercise in here to do something like this and talk about the Fed and talk about what they're saying, and each person on their own can decide whether or not it has implications or if it doesn't. But that's the challenges for me for trying to figure out whether or not it has any merit or it has any meaning. Because in April of 2021, how would this thing have given any signal that it's time to run when they're sitting there telling you inflation is transitory? We're not even thinking about raising interest rates, and we're not even thinking about running off the balance sheet. Right? It's hard. And the reason why I show that right now is because the entire narrative out there is we've just entered into this really long bear market, right? It's like you're almost literally insane to come out here and to say, hey, you know what? That might have actually been our capitulation, and that was the ending of the bearish period that we've been in here in this market. That is not the consensus in the market right now. That is not the sentiment at all. And it's not the messaging that's being given out there on Twitter and on YouTube videos, right? It was bull market, bull market, bull market, till finally right here, hey, we're in a bear market. But it's been so odd that this thing has been following a deep bear market fractal for so long, right in here, as we were back in our previous bear markets, and that the pico excitement, the extreme euphoria all occurred back in here. And even though we did that, it didn't return. So then it begs the question, right? One of the things out there that I'm still wrapping my head around is, why did so many of the good coins out there not run off into all-time highs yet, right? I mean, it's optimistic to say, hey, look, if this is true, hey, this thing could go off there. Hey, there's a bull run opportunity out here for the altcoin market. My particular exit plans that I have to follow, my rules that I have set for myself are that, we get back into retracement levels, I have to start letting go of some of my altcoins. Otherwise, I'm a hodler until we get to that moment. But if all of this is true and all of this runs off beyond that, then obviously it states I could end up selling some of my stuff too early at that moment. But it's still the rules that I had set for myself. But the vast majority of the cryptocurrencies out there, the ones that had a lot of underlying growth happen with them throughout the bear market that we've had, that have not gone into new all-time highs. You can name off almost all of them. Most things have not done it. Most of them look like this. They look just like Bitcoin did back in its bearish period from 2018 to 2020, where you have your big bear market, the 2021 rise is here, and then now revisiting the lows. And maybe there's some huge run that's coming out in here. I don't know. But I know that my rules indicate that I've got to do stuff about it when we get back into retracements, or else I have to keep holding if retracements don't come. That's just the rules that I've set for myself. But if this is all true, and if Bitcoin's not going into some big depth bear market, and that it's actually it's got another rise left in it before the really big bear market ends up coming in for it in here, that could explain away why we haven't seen all the action in the altcoin market. And that this has been a full-blown correction that's been happening in here before it goes off and has its real top. And as we can see, with the dollar reversing, the Dow Jones is up 672 points as we start off this week. Dollar just getting hammered. And every narrative in the world telling you, and sentiment out there telling you, that it's like unbelievably ridiculous to even be pointing towards saying that that's the end of the bear market. I wanted to show you all those things on there that point to that it could be. I've been staring at these charts, waking up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, being on these charts till 8, 9 o'clock at night, every single day, even throughout the weekend, trying to put this puzzle together the best that I can. And everything that I look at, it just builds this big case in here. Take from it what you will, but there's absolutely no question. We had a catalyst. We had the dollar peak so far. We've run the same amount of time as Bitcoin corrections from the past from peak activity. We ended up playing out the most painful structure that it could have been, and it matches what our capitulations have looked like before. And let's talk about something too. Let's hypothetically say that was it. That was the bottom. Well, what happened in 2018? What happened in 2015? Well, it's still dragged on for a really long time, right? Especially back there in 2018. The bottom came in, but we didn't end up running anything until the late 2020, right? So it was still like a year and a half before anything happened. But one of the conditions that are different here this time is that when that capitulation happened for Bitcoin back in 2018, the DXY was right here. It was still waddling its way for a long time. Like the structure of the Euro USD, that moment in time was right back in here. We've looked at this thing several times, and that if this is a reversal, if this plays out how we've seen these play out before, is that these things already start marching their way up. Bitcoin's capitulation still had a lot of working down that had to happen for the DXY back in 2019 and 2020, or the Euro USD. And there's still a lot of working out that had to still happen here for the DXY afterwards. And the reason we look at the DXY is because during these moments of falling, these have historically been good times for the altcoin market. And so when that bottom came in for Bitcoin back in 2018, the currency index wasn't ready to do anything at that time. But if this is true, the currency indexes are ready to start ripping and roaring in this direction already, that it doesn't still have to waddle for an extended long period of time, but that they're ready to start going. So that's an element that's different when we've looked at the DXY and saying that, it's when the DXY is falling, that's historically been good for the market. We know in 2018's capitulation, the DXY was still working its way in this structure. But if this is the case, if the DXY has reversed in the structure that we've seen before, it's just a work down already, that there is not still more waddling up here and then eventually to go in this structure. If that's how it plays out, that's how it plays out. But that's not what this structure has shown before. It shows that it's already working its way back down. And that would not be another 1.5 to 2 years of waiting in the circumstances like we had during the last time period. So I thought that was interesting and wanted to share that too. But in the end, that if we go back to when we had the laser eyes and diamond hands, peak on-chain activity, peak of Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, and for why we have been having this bear market fractal as the actual top of Bitcoin, we can see enough time has elapsed for a full bear market to have already played itself out. And that we see that over there in the altcoin market with Litecoin nailing it to the literal day. And so a lot of people will wonder, is that one the actual literal bottom? We've talked about these bottoms before. If it is the capitulation ending, how these things can play out in here, how there's kind of the fake that happens at the bottom, that the 200-day or the 200-week moving average still sits a little bit lower. So that stuff, that's still pretty blurry. But the main thing I wanted to show in this video was how this was what we had been talking about and trying to correlate it into what we're seeing actually happening in the market, and that we know that retail investors have capitulated into being bearish now after a prolonged bear market here in the cryptocurrency market, that now finally everyone's in agreement. We're in a bear market, but structurally on a running flat correction, that the market sentiment has shifted to that belief right on top of the 2017 all-time high for the altcoin market cap. And it's just fascinating. Now, I suspect you start breaking this thing down, that's probably not the best thing in the whole world. But all we could do really is look at where the market is at right now and kind of say, have we seen this before? And that's what all technical analysis is. Whether you're using indicators, whether you're using anything, everything is pulling data from the past to try to find some type of confluence to what's happening right now. And one of the hardest parts about right now being stuck here at this level for the last 11 days over there on Bitcoin is it hasn't given any signal of balance, or it hasn't given any signal of continuation. It's just been stuck really there. We know that we had extremely high volume there on that day when that happened, but we haven't had any additional price action play out in here to give us anything new to work with in the last few days or in the last week and a half. So it's a really big fingernail biting moment over here. And we're sitting on top of that all-time high for that altcoin market. I would think that's a pretty big decision point level for bull market or bear market. And we're still just sitting there, and we've been there for 11 days. So I wanted to show you all those things. It's been a long weekend for me looking at all these charts to try to really wrap my head around it and try to build some type of conviction. Nothing makes my wheels turn more than seeing everybody on the exact same side. And we know everybody's on the exact same side right now. We've seen what happens when that happens, whether that's laser eyes and diamond hands or screaming for 100K. So we'll see how things go. I did add a video over there on bcbacker.com over the weekend, a 45-minute video on stable coins. I'm still working towards adding more content on there. I'll put out some information here on the YouTube channel about stablecoins. I have been deep diving into stablecoins like nobody's business after what had happened over there with Terra Luna and Terra USD. And it was fascinating to see that if you go back to 2020, stablecoins only represented 3.6% of the market. And almost all of that was Tether. And it was 3.6% of the market. Right now, stablecoins represent 11.9% of our market. A huge growth in the stablecoin market. It's pretty wild. And my best guess on that is probably having to do with a lot with decentralized finance. But like I mentioned last week, my wife was sick and I've caught it. I've been sick all weekend while I've been doing this stuff too. I'm going to keep it at 3 videos for this week. Unless, of course, if something dramatic happens. We've been stuck here for the last 11 days. If something dramatic happens, I'll come and check in, but I am going to give my body some rest. I do have a fever right now. We've got a 100-degree fever as I'm recording this thing. But even as I've been sick, whether I'm laying there in bed with my iPad and studying these charts and doing all these things, trying to find the correlations of everything, I found all of this to be very interesting, and I wanted to share it all with you. So I don't know if I started rambling throughout the second half of it. I'm now like real tired. I'm like, I definitely want to go lay in bed now. But I hope that you guys had a good weekend. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.